Mara Hale stood inside a reinforced booth deep below the Atlantic, the walls humming with the pressure of oceans above her. She was not a soldier nor a scientist. She was a voice chosen to carry the weight of a planet across the stars, and as the red light blinked on, she knew there was no turning back. The message had been written by committees, revised by admirals, softened by teachers, and hardened by survivors. Yet it came down to her steady tone, her calm eyes, and her choice of breath. She lifted her chin and began to speak, and her words carried farther than she could ever imagine. Across hundreds of systems, alien crews froze as their consoles lit up with human syllables reshaped by translators until every listener heard their own tongue. Keth Varun, a veteran mediator of the coalition, leaned forward in disbelief on the bridge of his courier ship, the Asterion. He had expected human propaganda, maybe desperate pleas, but what came was different. Mara's voice filled the air and carried the weight of storms and stillness. She did not shout. She did not thunder. She simply stated, "Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be civilized." The words slid into every circuit without crashing them, a testament to careful engineering that respected protocols even while overriding them. Fleets that had dismissed humans as soft flinched at the implication they had always assumed restraint was weakness. But now they were being told restraint was a costume, one that could be removed. Keth watched his crew exchange nervous glances. The hum of their ship suddenly felt colder. Mara continued. She spoke of convoys attacked, of medics cut down, of pirates flying coalition flags. She displayed proof on the streams, timestamps, telemetry, all impossible to fake. She showed how human forces had held back again and again, shots curved to miss boarding parties carrying more medical kits than rifles. How even in war they had bent over backwards to save lives of enemies. She explained that this choice was deliberate but also finite. Humans would always choose to save life first, but if that choice endangered more than it saved, they would change their choice. She delivered it with warmth, the kind of warmth that made listeners believe she wanted peace, but the kind that also made them believe her when she said there would be no more tolerance. On Earth, crowds watched from city squares and rooftops, orbital mirrors dimming so the words scrolled clearly across the night. Sky in 1,000 languages. Children asked their parents if war was coming. Elders wept and whispered names of lost loved ones. Yet the silence that followed Mara's words was not despair. It was unity, a sense that the line had finally been drawn, not by generals or tyrants, but by people who had simply had enough. Keth understood more than most. He had studied human doctrine for decades, filling volumes with notes on their strange balance between mercy and power. He knew they engineered weapons of breathtaking precision and then set them aside to negotiate. He knew they had histories of vengeance but had chained those impulses for generations, and he knew that kind of restraint could not last forever. Now he heard Mara give coalition fleets a way out, neutral corridors for retreat, amnesty for crews who surrendered, audits by third parties, all carefully woven exit ramps that allowed an enemy to leave without shame. But behind every word he sensed the heavy door waiting to open. When the transmission ended, Mara stood silent in her booth, her heart hammering. She thought of her aunt's old photograph of a burned crater with the words, "Plant after the fire plant, until the ground remembers water." She whispered them now like a prayer. She had delivered the message with that spirit to warn, not to crush yet. In the deep bunkers she knew there were ships and weapons, sleeping weapons that had never seen the light of day, because humanity had chosen to be something else. But if pressed too far, they would awaken, and she prayed she would never hear them rise. Keth exhaled slowly. He would record his judgment honestly. The humans were not bluffing. Their broadcast was not empty theater. It was both olive branch and storm warning. He wished he could advise his superiors to step back, but the order was already coming through. Proceed with the mapping run of Luna. Assess defenses, do not engage. Keth looked at the stars one more time, feeling as though their shapes had shifted a fraction, as though the universe itself had tilted under the weight of a single human warning. And in his chest he carried a quiet dread that the coalition would test the mask and learn too late what lay behind it. The Asterion cut through silent, dark as it entered the edge of Earth space, its mission clear, yet reckless to test the truth of the warning, to probe defenses around Luna and gather intelligence without firing a single shot. Keth Varun sat among the command crew, his role that of observer. Yet his thoughts churned with unease. He knew too well what had been said, and he doubted whether this mission would end the way the Coalition intended. The humans had not threatened destruction. They had promised consequence, and Keth wondered what form consequence would take when mercy ran out. Mara Hale on Earth was already aware of the probe. Her booth was silent now. Yet she had not stepped away from her post. The wardens had flagged a ripple in communication streams. A ship trying to slip with stealth past listening posts. It was no surprise the Coalition had not trusted her words. The surprise was how little they understood the reach of human preparation. Mara stood before a council of commanders explaining calmly that there would be no direct strike, no act that could be twisted into proof of savagery. Instead, they would demonstrate precision. They would demonstrate that civilization was not weakness, it was choice. Above Luna, the Asterion moved carefully, its hull veiled in fields designed to confuse radar and mask thermal signatures. Keth watched readouts stabilize. The crew grew confident, whispering that perhaps humans were still bound by limits. Perhaps their warning was meant only for show. Then the first sign arrived, subtle. At first, consoles flickered as comms dropped to static, systems froze and rebooted. The navigation feed shifted to nonsense. Stars rotated in impossible arcs. Yet the ship was not under attack. It was inside a cage. Outside, invisible drones closed in their movements, exact, each one broadcasting silence on all known bands, creating a sphere of isolation around the Asterion. The crew scrambled to compensate, to break free, to fight the jamming. But every countermeasure was neutralized, not destroyed, simply muted, like a teacher gently moving a child's hand away from danger. Keith felt his throat tighten. This was not brute force. This was a demonstration. Mara watched from Earth as telemetry confirmed containment. She gave the order not to fire, not to damage, only to hold the cutter still in the shadow of Luna. Every move it made would be countered by the cage. Every system it tried to reroute would be matched by another layer of silence. The Asterion was a fly caught not in a web but in a glass jar, transparent, undeniable, and still alive. Inside the ship, panic spread. Voices rose in frustration. Some demanded weapons be primed. Others cursed the absence of targets. Keth alone remained calm. He had seen enough wars to know the difference between slaughter and instruction. This was the latter. Humans were sending a message as clear as any broadcast. They were saying, "You are inside our reach, and you still breathe because we permit it." He stood and asked the captain to transmit surrender logs, but the captain refused, pride stiffening his voice. "We are not under fire, we are simply jammed. We can still resist." But resistance meant nothing against silence. One by one, consoles dimmed, auxiliary systems. Failed engines spun down without explosion, without heat. The crew sat in forced stillness, a ship alive but paralyzed. Keth turned to them and spoke. "This is the warning made flesh. If we leave alive, remember, it do not twist it into weakness. It is strength tempered by choice." After hours of waiting, the silence shifted. The jamming lifted one corridor of communication, opened coordinates, streamed in clear and precise a safe path back to Coalition space, with a message attached: "Return home unharmed. Log your journey and know this was mercy." Keth persuaded the captain to obey because defiance now would mean annihilation. The ship turned and slipped from Earth space without a scar. Yet every crew member carried fear heavier than wounds. On Earth, Mara received confirmation of the release. She felt relief mixed with sorrow. She knew some would misinterpret mercy as before, but she also knew others would understand that humans had just shown how easily they could crush without killing. The wardens reminded her this was only the beginning. More probes would come, more tests would follow. Mara looked at the stars from her station and whispered that she hoped restraint would last yet. Deep inside, she felt the ground shifting the longer. Others refused to listen. The closer the day came when the mask would slip and the storm would break. The Coalition Council did not take the lesson, as Keth had hoped. Instead of seeing mercy as strength, they twisted the event into claims of human deception. They told their people the cutter had been sabotaged by its own crew or caught in a malfunction. They spread propaganda that humans were fragile, that their threats were masks for fear, and so they decided to escalate not with open fleets, but with smaller measures. They launched sanctions to choke human trade. They hired pirate clans to raid shipping routes. They whispered into markets that Earth was unreliable and dangerous. They believed they were tightening the noose without firing. Another shot. Mara Hale listened to the reports as they arrived at the council table. She saw the patterns that were meant to provoke but not trigger open war. She saw convoys rerouted through dangerous sectors where ambushes appeared and then vanished. She saw pirate ships marked with the colors of neutral guilds trying to board freighters full of grain, bound for starving colonies. Yet each time the wardens intervened, not with fire but with shadows. Saboteurs vanished and the night raiders found. Their engines cold and their weapons jammed. Their captains found themselves waking in cells with food on the table and a choice to walk away alive. Mara kept her tone measured as she explained to her own leaders that humanity could not answer deceit with slaughter. They would answer with control and patience. Keth Varun, meanwhile, traveled through human settlements under special permit. He wanted to see what they were protecting and what they were hiding. He walked through markets on Mars, where children ran between stalls carrying toys carved from recycled alloy. He sat in classrooms where teachers spoke of alien histories with respect rather than contempt. He visited clinics where humans treated wounded alien refugees with the same care as their own. He realized slowly that the mask the Coalition feared was not savagery waiting to be unleashed, it was pain, buried beneath generations of effort. He saw murals painted on crater walls that told of genocides long past, and he understood that humans remembered everything even when they forgave. Yet in the shadows, Keith also glimpsed something else, a unit that did not smile. The wardens they did not wear insignia of compassion. They wore quiet eyes and carried themselves like storms caged by will. He asked Mara once about them, but she only replied, "They are our reminder. They ensure we remember what we could become if we let go of restraint." Keth felt the truth in her words, and it unsettled him because he had seen civilizations fall into savagery, but never one that carried its savagery like a weight chained to its own back. The Coalition, meanwhile, pushed harder. They staged sabotage on a space elevator in Quito. They attempted to seed false evidence that humans were weaponizing relief convoys. They moved with the arrogance of empires that believed they still held advantage. Yet every time the plots unraveled, every time the wardens erased the threat before it bloomed, public opinion in neutral sectors began to shift. Whispers grew that humans were not weak but deliberate, that their patience was not cowardice but discipline. And the more propaganda the Coalition spread, the less it stuck. Mara gave another broadcast, not like the first grand message, but a quiet address streamed into neutral channels. She showed the sabotage attempts. She showed captured raiders eating food provided by their supposed victims. She explained with steady words that humanity would continue to defend life, even as lies spread. She asked only for observers to judge with their own eyes, and in doing so she planted seeds of doubt among billions. Keth could feel the tension in the air when he walked human streets. Now he saw kindness but also strain. He heard laughter in markets, but he also heard conversations cut short when wardens passed. He realized the mask was not infinite. It was upheld daily by effort and loss. He wondered how long before effort became exhaustion, and exhaustion became rage. The Coalition mistook the silence for weakness again, and prepared the next strike, one that would aim not at markets or trade, but at leadership itself. A plan to cut the head off the Human Council and leave Earth stumbling. The decision was made in secret chambers, yet ripples reached Keth, and he knew at last that the mask would be tested in ways he did not want to witness. He thought of Mara's calm eyes, and wondered if even she could hold back the storm that was building behind them. The plot to cripple human leadership unfolded in silence across the belt and the moons of Jupiter. The Coalition had decided that the only way to break Earth was to strike not at its armies or its fleets, but at the voice that held them together. They believed that, without Mara Hale and the Council, the mask would fall into chaos. They whispered to themselves that humanity was fragile unity, made from words alone. And so they launched their plan with precision. They sent ghost fleets through the outer dark. Their signatures disguised their orders clear to strike at the Council station above Ceres, where representatives met, and to do it in one sharp blow that would decapitate the voice of restraint. Mara stood in the chamber at Ceres, unaware of the timing, but not of the danger. For weeks she had felt the ground shifting. She had read reports of unusual traffic near Jovian space. She had seen merchant ships vanish only to reappear stripped of goods. She spoke quietly to her aides that an attack was inevitable, and so she ordered the evacuation drills to be rehearsed again and again. Even as others scoffed, she knew patience and mercy did not blind humans to risk it, only delayed response until the moment was certain. When the coalition fleets came, the sky above Ceres erupted with silent flashes, drives igniting in ambush patterns. Their ships screamed toward the station with weapons hot, but they found not the council alive, and panicked inside only steel shells waiting for them, for Mara had ordered a decoy station built and staffed by drones. The council itself had slipped away hours before to deep bunkers hidden in the rock. The first barrage tore through empty chambers and hollow walls. Keith Varun, who had been allowed to attend the council as observer, felt the vibration beneath his feet and realized with a shiver that he was standing not in a slaughterhouse, but in a trap. The wardens answered the attack not with firestorms, but with choreography as the coalition ships closed their drives, flickered and died, targeted by pulses that stripped command signals without tearing hulls apart. Railguns spun down, mid-charge torpedoes froze in their launchers. Entire crews found their ships drifting powerless, their strikes gone to silence like a storm cut off by the hand of God. And as the attackers struggled, human drones latched onto their hulls, injecting signals that disabled navigation and weapons, leaving only life support untouched. Mara emerged on broadcast across the battlefield, not in anger but in sorrow. She spoke directly to the crews who had come to kill her. She told them, "You are alive because we chose you to be alive. We will not punish you for orders you did not give. We will not slaughter those who were told lies, but we will not allow this again." She ordered that every captured ship be towed and its crews released at neutral ports with their logs intact, so the galaxy could see what had been attempted and what had been spared. Yet even in victory, there was loss. A warden cell assigned to guard alien refugees on Ceres had refused evacuation. They had held their post to keep civilians safe, and when debris from the decoy station rained down, their shelter had collapsed, crushing them beneath the wreckage. The news spread quickly through human space. The wardens had died not in vengeance but in protection, and grief moved through the population like a tide. For Keth, it was the moment he saw the mask strained to hold. He stood with Mara afterward. As she looked at the names of the fallen, she did not cry. She only whispered that patience had a cost, and every time mercy was chosen over retribution, that cost grew heavier. He saw in her eyes a flicker of the storm that lay beneath, and he realized that humanity could not hold the mask forever. He realized that the coalition had miscalculated badly, for instead of proving weakness, they had fed the fire of resolve. Across the neutral zones, broadcasts of the failed strike and the calm human response spread quickly. Billions began to ask what kind of people spared attackers again and again, what kind of power could disable fleets without killing them, and what kind of patience was required to do so for so long. Whispers of respect grew into shouts of support. While within the coalition, some captains began to doubt their orders. Some wondered aloud whether they were not the civilized side at all. Mara returned to her post, knowing this was only the middle of the storm, but with every passing day she felt the line thinning. She had sworn to hold the mask in place, to be the voice that guided humanity's mercy. But in her heart, she could hear the wardens whispering from their graves that patience cannot last forever, and that one day, the choice would come when mercy would no longer save more lives than wrath, and when that day arrived, Earth would not hold back. The coalition realized their attempts to cut the head from the human council had failed. Yet instead of stepping back, they reached for darker tools in secret laboratories hidden in hollow moons. They had been working on a weapon they believed would break human resolve, not by burning ships or shattering cities, but by striking at the mind itself. The weapon was a pulse designed to scramble neural pathways for minutes to hours, leaving soldiers, civilians, and leaders paralyzed, helpless, and vulnerable. They unleashed it not on a battlefield but on a farming arcology, orbiting Saturn, a place where families tended crops under glass, a place where there were no weapons, only soil and song. The day began like any other for the settlers. They woke to tend hydroponic gardens and to release livestock into grazing sections when the pulse struck. It came without warning. Lights flared in the sky and then dimmed. Every living mind faltered. Children froze with hands outstretched. Elders slumped against Walls workers dropped tools and stared into nothing for 7 endless minutes, time stretched into eternity. Parents could not move to comfort their children, and fear had no voice to scream. It was a silence heavier than death. Keth Varun was present. As part of his observer mission, he had asked to see how humans lived in peace, and instead he was forced to watch horror unfold. He tried to move, and found himself half trapped in the same paralysis, his alien physiology less affected, but still. Wounded, he staggered through the arcology halls, seeing the blank eyes of hundreds of humans unable to react when alarms blared, unable to respond as systems buckled. He had seen weapons of mass destruction before, but this one cut deeper because it mocked life by leaving it intact and empty. When the pulse ended, bodies shook back to life. Sobs filled the air. Children cried out and clung to parents who had been statues. Elders gasped as if surfacing from drowning. Mara Hale appeared across, every screen within minutes, her face calm but her eyes shadowed by grief. She did not shout or curse. She spoke in even tones, so that children listening would not hear panic. She told the settlers that they were not alone. That help was already on. The way she promised that those responsible would face justice, and she pleaded once more to the galaxy to stand against such crimes. Her words carried steadiness, but Keth heard the steel beneath. He knew she was speaking through grief and fury, so deep it could break stone. The wardens moved swiftly. In the aftermath, they traced the signal of the pulse across relays hidden in asteroid fields. They uncovered the signatures of coalition hardliners who had authorized the experiment, and they delivered the evidence to neutral channels. Mara broadcast the proof without commentary, letting the galaxy see for itself who had chosen to paralyze children, who had chosen to use minds as battlefields. And for the first time, large crowds on alien worlds rallied openly for Earth. But behind the broadcast, something darker stirred. The wardens opened vaults long sealed beneath mountain ranges. They brought out weapons marked with the code, axioms, artifacts of an earlier age, when humanity had clawed itself back from near extinction. These were not ordinary arms. They were principles forged into machines, each one built to end wars quickly and decisively. They had been hidden because to use them was to walk the edge of savagery. Mara stood before the vault doors, and her hands trembled as she authorized their inspection. Keth was granted a glimpse, though he wished afterward that he had not. He saw weapons that hummed without sound, ships that seemed to carry void within them, algorithms that predicted enemy choices before they were made. He felt the chill of inevitability standing in that chamber. He realized that if the coalition forced the mask away, the galaxy would learn what it meant to face a people who had engineered their own survival in the crucible of destruction. Mara made one final plea before the storm. She spoke again across open channels, her voice quiet yet carrying to millions. She said that humanity still held the door open for peace, that those who surrendered would be protected, that those who confessed and disarmed would live. She said that every restraint was stretched thin, but not yet broken, and she begged leaders across the stars to stand down. Keth listened and hoped, but deep in his chest, he felt the tremor of something inevitable. The coalition had crossed a line that could not be erased, and now mercy itself was in danger of breaking apart. The day came when humanity decided that mercy must walk with teeth. The coalition had ignored every plea, had twisted every proof, had chosen to escalate with cruelty and deception. And so the wardens activated the axioms for the first time in centuries. Fleets rose from hidden dry docks in the Pacific and in Martian caverns. Black ships that drank in the light as if made from shadow itself spread their wings into space, and when they moved, it was without fanfare. No drums, no thunder, only silence broken by precision. The campaign lasted one day, and yet it rewrote the map of power across the Orion Arm. In the first hours, human cyber war units moved like whispers through coalition networks, shutting down shipyards with codes that could not be scrubbed, freezing treasuries in vaults that suddenly belonged to no one, and silencing command. AIs that blinked into sleep without warning. Entire fleets found themselves adrift, unable to receive orders or to coordinate, and yet no lives were lost in those opening moments. It was the strike of a surgeon, not the blow of a butcher. Keth Varun stood on a neutral station orbiting Tau Ceti. When the first reports arrived, he watched coalition officers rush to consoles only to find their systems blind. their supply chains cut, their war treasuries locked away by invisible hands. And he heard the panic rise in voices that had never known defeat. He knew then that the mask had slipped not into savagery, but into something colder. A discipline sharpened into a blade that could carve empires apart without leaving bodies in its wake. Mara Hale spoke once again, her face appearing on every surviving channel. She offered safe passage to any ship that powered down weapons. She promised that no crew would be harmed if they ceased aggression. She showed live feeds of coalition hardliners, screaming at their subordinates, ordering suicide charges while their fleets flickered and died around them. And she revealed logs of their crimes, their orders to use the mind scour weapon, their plans to frame human convoys, their attempts to assassinate. Her on series, she broadcast everything not with anger but with clarity, and the galaxy listened. The Wardens executed operations with frightening precision in the belt. They disabled orbital cannons by triggering safety locks in the inner systems. They jammed navigation relays so that no hostile fleet could plot a course toward Earth. In the outer dark, they sent ghost ships to shadow the Coalition's strongest dreadnoughts, and within minutes, those giants went cold. Their reactors sealed. Their weapons stilled the crews alive but powerless, watching black human vessels drift silently outside their windows like specters. Neutral observers began to speak out. Leaders who had once doubted now addressed their people, declaring that the Coalition had provoked this response, that humans had shown restraint for too long, and that what was unfolding was not conquest, but deterrence. The balance shifted not only on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion, and billions of alien citizens who had been fed propaganda began to question the lies. Keth moved through the neutral station, speaking with officials who trembled at the news. He told them that this was not the storm, at full strength. This was a warning carried out with careful mercy. He told them that if the Coalition forced escalation further, humanity could do worse, far worse, and he meant it. He had seen the vault, he had seen the axioms, and he knew the black ships drifting like shadows were only a fraction of the arsenal that lay waiting. By nightfall, the Coalition's capacity to wage war was broken. Their treasuries remained locked. Their fleets drifted powerless. Their propaganda collapsed under the weight of proof. Mara ordered that every corridor be opened for surrendering ships. She commanded that medical aid be sent to any crew that had suffered. During the sudden shutdowns, she forbade vengeance and reminded her commanders that they were still civilized. But she also told them that civilization did not mean helplessness. It meant choosing strength carefully. As the stars turned quiet, Keth realized that the galaxy was standing on the edge of a choice. Some leaders would surrender and live. Some would cling to pride and fall. And he feared what humanity might be forced to do if pride prevailed. He looked at Mara's calm eyes in her last broadcast of the day, and he knew that behind them there was sorrow for the mercy that had been stretched to its limit, and that the next time humanity acted, the mask might not be able to settle back into place at all. The stars above the Pacific glittered like shards of glass as the first peace station unfolded its panels, a transparent dome rising slowly from the ocean waves powered by orbiting arrays and guarded not by warships but by the silent black vessels of the Wardens. The same ships that had disabled entire fleets now hovered without weapons drawn. They stood as witnesses to the moment humanity offered the galaxy a choice. Mara Hale walked the polished floor of the dome, her steps echoing faintly as she prepared for the arrival of delegates not only human, but alien as well, leaders from empires that had once laughed at. Earth now came quietly, carrying the weight of their people's fear and hope. Keth Varun was among the first to step into the chamber. His stride measured, his mind heavy. He had been chosen by the Coalition remnants to negotiate, though he carried little authority, for their fleets were broken, their treasuries sealed, their propaganda in ruins. Yet he still came because someone had to speak, and because he believed humanity could be persuaded to leave the door open. He stood across from Mara, and for a moment they looked at each other not as adversaries but as two people who had borne the burden of choices that affected billions. Mara raised her hand, and the dome dimmed, showing a projection of the galaxy around them, routes lit in silver, like veins across a living body. She explained that Earth did not want dominion, it did not want thrones or crowns. What it wanted was survival without fear. She pointed to new neutral corridors safeguarded by human technology, open to all species. For trade and evacuation, she declared that any fleet crossing them with weapons active would be stopped. Not destroyed, but stopped their power stripped until they chose peace. She called it the Charter of Guardianship, a framework not for conquest, but for shared protection. The room murmured with disbelief. Some leaders whispered that it was impossible to enforce. Others demanded to know if Earth would remain the only keeper of such power. Mara answered calmly that the wardens would hold the keys, but they would hold them not as rulers but as watchers, bound by rules and audits open to any neutral observers. She reminded them that the broadcast that had begun this all had not been a threat but a plea. She repeated the words, "Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be civilized." And she asked every leader if they truly wanted to see what would happen if the mask fell away completely. Keth listened carefully, and then spoke, his voice weary but clear. He admitted that the coalition had misjudged humanity. He confessed that arrogance had led them to push too far, and that he himself had seen enough to know the warnings were never lies. He asked Mara what would happen if humanity one day grew tired, if the wardens failed, if anger overcame restraint, and for the first time Mara let silence linger before she answered. She said, "Then we will no longer deserve to lead, and we will place the keys in the hands of others, because power is only safe when it knows it can be taken away." Answer rippled across the chamber, and for the first time delegates leaned forward, not in fear, but in cautious respect. They saw a people who carried unmatched strength, yet also carried the will to restrain it. They saw a civilization that had paid, in grief and patience and loss, to remain civilized when it could have chosen annihilation. Long ago they began to understand that Earth was not rising as a conqueror, but as a reluctant guardian. As the day stretched, the charter was signed not by all but by enough to begin the change. Ships powered down weapons and drifted through safe corridors. For the first time in decades, pirates abandoned ambushes when their weapons froze in their hands, and entire worlds once trembling at the coalition's demands now looked toward Earth for stability. The war was not erased, but its course was bent toward peace. When the chamber emptied and the night grew quiet, Mara walked alone to the edge of the dome. She looked out at the ocean waves crashing softly below and whispered to herself that the mask would never be put away entirely. It would always be there, waiting, a reminder of what could happen if patience failed. She knew the wardens would keep their vigil, and she prayed that the galaxy would learn the lesson without forcing humanity to teach it again. Keth stood beside her for a long moment and then spoke quietly. He said that history would remember this, not as the day humanity became a monster, but the day humanity chose to remain something. Mara nodded, her eyes still on the stars, and answered softly that choosing was the hardest part, and it always would be. The ocean rolled, the stars shone, and the peace station glimmered above the Pacific, a symbol not of dominance, but of warning, and of hope. Earth had given its final warning, and for now the galaxy had listened, and in that fragile silence civilization held. The years that followed the broadcast and the campaign were heavy with memory, yet lighter with hope. For the first time in generations, trade routes flowed without raids because any weapon raised inside them froze into stillness. For the first time, relief convoys reached famine worlds without being stripped by pirates. For the first time, the galaxy looked to Earth, not as a colony to exploit or a nuisance to ignore, but as a neighbor both feared and respected. Mara Hale remained the steady voice of that new order. She traveled from system to system, speaking of patience and discipline, reminding leaders that restraint was not weakness but strength chosen. Every day she carried the faces of the wardens who had died at Ceres, and the children who had been frozen by the scour weapon. And those memories gave her words. Wait. Keth Varun became her unlikely ally. He returned to his people carrying truth not softened by propaganda. He told them what he had seen. He told them about ships captured without bloodshed, about pirates fed rather than executed, about a civilization that carried mercy like armor, and vengeance like fire. Chained deep below his testimony, broke the last hold of lies within the coalition. And though many leaders still resisted, their own people began to demand peace. The great war machine crumbled, not from defeat in battle, but from the collapse of belief. The wardens themselves remained in shadow, yet their presence was felt. They enforced the charter without cruelty, but with precision. They stood as living proof of what humanity could unleash, if pushed too far, and in that proof lay deterrence greater than any fleet. The galaxy slowly adjusted to this balance. New treaties formed, new markets opened, and even species that once plotted invasion now found profit in cooperation. The mask of civilization no longer looked like disguise. It looked like the chosen face of a people who had stared into their own abyss and stepped back from it. But Mara never forgot the fragility of it all. She would stand in the transparent dome above the Pacific and watch the horizon. Where sky met sea, she knew that one reckless act, one leader blinded by pride, could still force humanity to show the storm behind the calm. She whispered often to herself the words she had spoken that day. We do not want to be the monster in your stories. We want to be the neighbor who brings bread and tools when your roof is gone. She prayed the galaxy would keep choosing to let those words be enough. Keth once joined her at that dome, his hair gray, his voice softer. He asked her if she believed the galaxy had truly learned, and Mara smiled faintly and replied, "Learning is never finished. It is like planting after a fire. You plant again and again until the ground remembers water." Keth nodded and said, "Then perhaps one day we will remember." Two together they stood in silence as the ocean rolled, and the stars above traced patient arcs reminding both that peace is not given, it is built with choice and guarded with vigilance. And so Earth's final warning remained written across the memory of every species, a warning and a promise: stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be civilized. The galaxy had listened, and for now it had chosen life, and the mask stayed in place, not as deception but as hope. The end.